Please try to be here not later than 7:45 during closed classes for the meditation. And I'll explain the reason for that. You may have noticed last night something a little different in the room than you ordinarily find at a lecture. The reason is this. Not only that during a closed class, before, during, and after, that I spend many hours in meditation, but the students spend much longer time in meditation. And here's what happens. Instead of the lecturer or teacher voicing some intellectual truth or some truth through the mind, and you're accepting it in the mind, it becomes a spiritual impartation, and one which you are more responsible for than I am. You draw it forth. You would be astounded if you could see the difference in the messages with different groups of students. You would be much surprised if you could see the message or hear the message that comes through when there is a group of beginners or a group of students who are studying a half a dozen different metaphysical teachings, or a message that comes through when we are a group of students all of one mind in one place, thoroughly spiritually prepared. Now here's what happens. Deep down within your being, there is this hunger for God, this hunger for truth that brought you originally to the study. That hunger, that thirst for truth, has led you step by step until you have come to this point of your unfoldment. Now then, the deeper the thirst and the hunger, the bigger meal you draw forth. The greater your longing for truth, the greater your devotion to truth, the greater effort of time, the greater effort of study, practice, meditation that you put forth, the greater the amount that you will draw forth from the teacher. Now, there is another thing. A teacher may know all of the truth that can be found in books. The teacher may know all the truth there is and yet not give it to you. The teacher may be deeply inspired of God and not give it to you. Why? If you do not draw it forth, it cannot come. It is for that reason that we have had classes with as many as 66 practitioners in it. And out of such classes have come the Master Speaks. God, the substance of all form, came out of a class of 99 students, of whom not less than 30 were practitioners. I mean professional practitioners, people already sufficiently aware of truth as to be able to practice the truth. And so it is, we have had in every city where closed classes have been held, we have had little groups that are called practitioner groups, mostly consisting of students who have been either in the Infinite Way study for a long, long time, or who are actively engaged in the practice, and some in the teaching, of truth. And you can imagine the depth that they bring forth. Now, when you come in your hunger, in your thirst for truth, and you create an atmosphere of silence, it is as if you are creating a vacuum for the teacher to fill in. The deeper the vacuum you create, the deeper the silence there is in the room, the deeper the message that is going to come forth. Now, this is all part of spiritual being and spiritual teaching. Another thing, it would make no difference if the teacher gave you the very height and depth of spiritual wisdom. If you were prepared only to hear it with your mind, you would not receive it. You would receive words, statements. You might even remember some of them. But you would not have the water of eternal life. You would not have the meat that satisfies. You would only have the froth at the top. The result of a closed class depends upon two things: the depth of the silence of the student and the depth of preparation of the teacher. One without the other is of no avail. It would make no difference what I did in the matter of meditation, consecration, if you were not prepared to receive it. I would be the only one benefiting by it. On the other hand, even if I were half prepared and you were wholly prepared, you would receive more from it than if you weren't prepared at all. That is why, to me, the closed class is a sacred thing. It is the reason that I seek no closed classes. It is the reason that I seek no students for closed classes. I am happy to welcome those who come. It is for that reason that we have the meeting a little earlier. It is for that reason that only those are accepted in a closed class who have made preparation for the entire class. There has never been a class when, after the first night or second night, I haven't received telephone calls. Oh, I heard about the class, but I didn't know about it in time. Can I begin tonight? Or some other reason for breaking into the middle of a class, and the answer is always the same. No one can come into a closed class on Tuesday night. They are there Monday night, or they do not come in. Why? Well, you were here last night, and you know the nature of the message you received. Now what would happen if 6 people were in this room tonight who had not been present last night? They would entirely have missed that important opening point, and not only that, but they would interfere with you, because now we would have someone here not a part of our consciousness yet, and probably I would be reaching out to bring them up to date with us. Whereas now, I need have no thought about last night at all. I can go right on from where we were. So please remember that as long as there are Infinite Way closed classes, and never be surprised if they should come suddenly to an end, because with each one I promise myself There will not be another. Each one now for the last 2 years has been the last. I'm getting to be like that singer. No, Sarah Bernhardt, who was always on a farewell tour. Each class now is my farewell. There just happens, though, to be one more, but one of these days it will be farewell. But as long as they take place, please remember that to me they are something sacred. They are an experience. With each one is the fervent hope that we will have experiences, as we have had in some, of the actual realization and visitation of the Christ itself. Now, those 15 minutes of preparation may change the entire nature of the class for you and for me. That 15 minutes of meditation may set the stage to bring forth the stage of consciousness, to bring forth a message that ordinarily would not be brought out of me without it. And that's very important, because from the standpoint of our work, there is only one thing of importance, and that is that we make room for God to reveal itself. I have very little interest in telling you what I know about truth, for the simple reason that there are plenty of the books for you to read. My earnest hope with each class is that something new, something different, or a new aspect of truth will reveal itself. And so far, that has happened at every class because we have been able to maintain the sacredness of the closed class experience. All right. Let us meditate right now. Is not God. Remember that statement. A concept of God is not God. A belief about God is not God. A statement about God is not God. Only God is God. Whatever you may think about God does not make that the power. Let us understand this. We have believed that God is power. And because of our understanding of the word power, we have sought to use God as we would use a power. Now then, the mistake comes not from the statement that God is power, but from our understanding or misunderstanding of the nature of the word power. It might rightly be said that God is power. But the moment that that is said, it becomes necessary for us to change our concept of the meaning of the word power. Let us see how that works. In one way, the word power means something that we can use, like the power of electricity, the power of heat, the power of cold. We can use those things. We can utilize them for our purposes. They are powers. Wind is a power that can be harnessed, that can be used. Is God that kind of power? No. No, God isn't that kind of power. God is not any kind of power that can be used. And yet, in another sense, God is power. Now let us see how that works. We know that if we plant roses, roses will grow. We know that no matter where on earth we come in contact with 2 times 2, the result is 4. We know that do, re, mi, no matter where met and under what conditions, have certain values. Do is always do, re is always re, mi is always mi. We may sing them off key, so may all the rest of the world. But that has nothing to do with the value do, re, mi. That is always absolute, complete. It is the same with numbers. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each one of those numbers is complete within itself, and it always has the same value whether you meet those numbers in one country or another, whether you voice them in one language or another. The value is always the same. Now, who made that so? Not you, certainly not I, not any man, but there is a principle of life that has given to number 1, 2, 3 their values, to do, re, mi their values. There is a principle of life that expresses itself in complete and perfect tones of music, complete and perfect numbers, complete and perfect laws of the universe. That is why we have the sun, moon, stars, each complete in themselves, each units in themselves, each given certain qualities and activities, and who made it so in the beginning, and who maintains it so? That which we call God. Therefore, God is the power of this universe. God is the power, we call it the creative principle, and the maintaining and sustaining principle of this universe. Now, can we use that power? No. No. There is no one that can take that power unto himself and use it for any purpose. That power just is. You can bring yourself into accord with that power. You can bring yourself under the reign, under the government of that power, but you cannot use it. You cannot move a single star in heaven. You cannot change the tides. The hours of their coming and going is set for 1,000 years ahead. Now, Miss Caldwell, it just will have to. God is power in the sense that God is the creative principle and the maintaining and the sustaining principle of this universe. God has given us the day to follow night, the night to follow day. God has given us the sun for certain purposes, the oceans, the tides. God has given us the land, the valleys, the mountains, the woods. All of this God has given us, but God has not given us any power to get God to use power for our purposes. Is that clear? God is power. If it weren't for the power of God, we probably would not have air to breathe. We probably would not have oceans to sail. We probably would not have oil in the ground. or coal. There is a power of God, but it is not a power that we can use. No one can set out and say, I am going to use God's power and put coal in my ground, or oil, or gold, or silver, or platinum. But the power of God does place it there, and we may avail ourselves of that which God has done. Do you see God in a different light there? Now, this is important because when you come to bringing out harmony in your experience, and all of us want that, all of us need more of it than we have, physical, mental, moral, and financial harmony, harmony in relationships, let us remember to begin with that we cannot use God for that purpose. However, we can know this: God has already established through law the means of our physical, mental, moral, financial, and human, or so-called human, harmony. Therefore, it becomes our need to learn this spiritual law, or these spiritual laws, avail ourselves of them, bring ourselves in harmony with them. Never seek to use them. That will not do. You can walk outside in the sunlight and take the benefit of its warmth, and in the warmer climates of its suntan, but you cannot go to the sun and use it for your purpose. You can avail yourself of its power, and that is all. Now, when you come to what we call prayer or healing work, remember as you sit down in silence that you are not going to God to get something. You are not sitting down to try to bring God down to your universe, that you are sitting there for the realization of that which already is, for its unfoldment. And then a miracle begins. You will refrain from mental effort. You will refrain from what heretofore has been called in metaphysical work mental work, mental treatment. You will refrain from this attempt to use your mind and thought to bring something about, something that you never had the possibility of bringing about. You will learn to sit quietly and peacefully and let it come to you. Let it appear. You will become a beholder, and you will, it's almost as if you watched it come over your shoulder out here into visibility. But you will not be straining mentally to bring it about. You will not be straining mentally to create it. For you in these coming months to gain for yourselves this realization of God as power, yet God as not power. It will be necessary for you to bring yourself to the realization of the function of God in our experience. It is not the function of God to be used as if we, in our pitiful little wisdom, could tell God what to do or how to do it or what we need, as if we could advise God. Somewhere in Scripture it tells us that we know not how to pray. We must let the Spirit bear witness with our spirit. We must let the Spirit make intercession for us. In other words, let Spirit, God, do the praying. And I have said in the writings that ultimately in our practice, in our spiritual practice and healing work, we do not pray or give a treatment. It is God that prays. We become a witness to God praying in us, God revealing its truth. You may say, not our knowing the truth, but God knowing the truth in us. And that is the actual top of the mountain in prayer, when prayer becomes the Word of God revealing itself to us. Not when we go to God, but when God reveals itself within us. That comes about through the development of a state of receptivity within us. The ability to listen, to hear that still small voice, the ability to refrain from using mental powers. Now, as we pass from that word power, we will take up another word. This time, the word love. And we know from John that God is love. I have heard many people say, I don't believe it. I only have to look out at this world and see the injustices and the discords and the diseases that innocent people suffer, even innocent children. And I know that God isn't love. God isn't caring for those children. God isn't caring for those people. And there you see comes again the misinterpretation of the word love. When we think of love, we think of the love that exists between friends, parent to child, husband to wife, or wife to husband, children to parents. We think of love in those terms. And I think we can agree with some of our friends that God isn't that kind of love. Then our first reaction is, God is not love. Yes, that's true in the same sense that last night we brought out, God is not power. Now we see God as power in an entirely different light, because the word power has a different meaning. So we must start thinking of love as we think of love. We must start with a statement, God is not love. Then, when we have cleared ourselves of God as love as we might think of love, we would be ready for the interpretation of what John meant when he said, God is love. Then we'll find a meaning of love that had nothing to do with anything that we ever thought of as love. The point now that I would like to make is this. There is no use of substituting words or interpretation of words from a human standpoint. In other words, if we say God is not power, don't make the mistake of in the next breath saying, well, Joel said God is power, so we will accept his view. Because then you put yourself back in the position of accepting probably another concept of God, and then find that that may not be God. And so here is how we come to our study. We refrain from the use of labels, judgments. in this wise. Let me say to myself, and you say to yourself, God is. Now, that is not a concept, is it? That is definite. There's no one here that doubts that God is. You can't doubt that God is if you are here, because you have to account for yourself in some way. And no matter how you account for it, something higher than human expression did it. Because even if we were to accept human conception, there always is the question, well, how did the seed get there? Or what turned the seed into a full-blown child? And so, no matter how materialistic the concept of our existence is, somewhere you must acknowledge that a power operated, or something operated, first of all to produce a seed, second of all that had the intelligence enough to know how to bring the two seeds together, then thirdly enough to act upon the seed and take it from its seed stage to its full-grown infant stage. And of course you have to further acknowledge that in some way, some power raised that tiny infant up to adulthood. No matter what materialism embraces one's thought on the subject of creation, even human creation, there must at some time come the realization, yes, but something invisible produced that which was visible. Something acted upon that which was visible to produce the effect. And once we get to that, we have acknowledged God, by what other name you wish to give it. You can call it nature if you like, call it anything you like, but it is deific. It is that which is above the human. Now, once you look upon yourself and say, oh yes, I am, or you look out upon this universe and see the stars, the sun, the moon, the oceans, this wonderful earth, the animals upon it, inwardly, regardless of reason, inwardly, intuitively, there comes the realization, oh yes, God is. Now, if we have within our own being an acceptance of that truth that God is, we have gone as far as we can go without creating concepts. That is, without creating God in our own image and likeness to suit our own idea of what God is. Let us be satisfied with the truth that God is, and then go to no man for any description or any definition or any defining of what God is. Let us now agree God is. Then, as we turn in meditation, we can say to God, all right, God, thou art. I know that because I am. But now, what art thou? Who art thou? Where art thou? Why art thou? What is the function of God? Now you may address your question to God itself. You know there's a God now. Inwardly the feeling has come, the conviction has come, God is. All right? Now let us turn to God for our teaching, and let us see how God defines or reveals itself to us. Well, let us say that, I'm speaking now only for myself, let us say that in my inner meditation, God has revealed itself as power. And probably in my ignorance, I set about trying to use that power. and then found that it wasn't that kind of a power. I had to go back all over again and then have it define itself to me as this power which is, not which is used, a power which is, let us say, creative power, that it made all that was made in the beginning, and all that it made was good. Let us say then that to me has come this realization that God is, and God's creation is, and God's creation is good. Has nothing to do with you, remember. This is an individual unfoldment within me. But you come to me and recognize that, or have been told that I have something, and so you say, will you give me help? And I say, yes. And then as I turn within, I know that I can't use God in your behalf. I know that I can't swing God around and have him do my will for you. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what's good for you. I have to even leave that with God. And so, as I turn within, with the realization that God is, and that God is the creative principle of all that is, that is the nature of God, creative principle. I am, so I know that that which is God must have created me. I know that you exist, and therefore I know that God created you. Now, I sit there and I realize not only God is, but you are. I do not deny your illness, or your unemployment, or your unhappy relationship. I don't deny that. Nor do I affirm that you are spiritual, or perfect, or good. Oh, no. I affirm nothing about you except one thing. You exist. That I know because God exists, and God exists infinitely, and therefore you must be part of that infinity. God exists, and you exist at the standpoint of God. That's all I know. As I ponder that idea, as I stand within my own being in this realization, God is. You are. I put no labels upon you. I do not call you spiritual. I do not call you mortal. I do not call you perfect. I do not deny that you are sick. I put no labels upon you. I affirm nothing about you. I deny nothing about you. I know only one thing. God is, I am. God is, you are. Now, into that vacuum which I have created by withdrawing judgment or labels, all of a sudden an inflow comes to me defining that which you are. It may then say to me, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Well, that's good enough for me. I'm not judging by appearances anyhow. That's good enough for me. If the Father says to me, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, I'm satisfied with that treatment. Or the Father may say, I am with thee, or I am present, or I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. That's meant as much for you as for me, because God has no favorites. Whatever is true of me must be universally true, or it would not be true. And so whatever comes to me in my unfoldment is the treatment. I haven't given a treatment. But neither have I humanly denied the error and affirmed the truth. I have just refused to put any labels, any judgments upon this universe. I have been asked at times where there was a drought, can't you pray for rain? No, because I can't know that there was a drought. I don't know what there is. I only know God is. If God is, that's enough to know. And in knowing that, a flood of something came in, and in 2 cases at least, we had a very quick rain. Now that was not by acknowledging an absence of rain. To him that hath not shall be taken away even a little bit that he has. So you acknowledge a drought, and you have 2. Nor was it stupidly, metaphysically saying, oh, there's an abundance of rain. No, I can't insult my intelligence that way. I just cannot look at a mortal and say, oh, there is pure spiritual being. That's not a treatment to me. That's an insult to my God-given intelligence. I would rather say, I don't know what's there. Perhaps my vision is blurred. I may be seeing God erroneously or Christ erroneously, but I am not going to judge. One thing I acknowledge. God is. That's all. Now, in the acknowledgement of that is, you have seen this, that if you say God is power, and you have some preconceived idea of what power is, you may be wrongly naming God. You may be expecting of God that which cannot come forth. If through your meditation, if through your pondering, God reveals itself to you as power, it will also define for you the nature of the power which God is. It is in this same way that the Hindus have a 3-faced God. And for a long, long time, that was a mysterious idea to me. A God that creates, a God that maintains, and a God that destroys. That's the Hindu 3-faced God. Well, it's a little bit easy to understand God, the creative principle, and also God, the maintaining principle. But this God, the destroying principle, seems strange. And why does it seem strange? Because we have certain preconceived ideas of what destroying means, what destruction means. And we always think of destruction as the destruction of something good. And for that reason, when we hear of a destroying God, we become very uncomfortable. Now, as we turn to God for a defining of God the destroyer, what do we hear within ourselves? What do we learn? That God is destructive to all unlike itself. That God is the destroyer of false concepts. God is the destroyer of false beliefs. Or, in that sense, our God the destroyer becomes a wonderful idea. So it is, we go to God is love. Well, we saw downstairs or around the corner or upstairs, in which one of the places we have been, that God is not love from the standpoint of the love that we humanly understand. God is not love. But then, when we come to viewing the fact that 1, 2, 3 always maintains their own numerical integrity, their value, unchanging, the do-re-mi always is maintained as a perfect do-re-mi, that 2 times 2 always is 4. Now we begin to understand the nature of God as love. And as I said, an ancient philosopher, one of the 3, said, you can know God's love by God's law. Now we have a new meaning of the word love. You can know God's love by God's law. Well, yes, as long as we follow the principle of mathematics correctly, God's love is made manifest in the fact that we can never make a mistake. Our mathematics, whether in our individual checkbook or in a massive engineering project, always will be perfect to the thousandth of an inch. Why? Because of God's law of mathematics, which is unchangeable and unchanging, and for that reason we can say God's law is love, or God's love is law. Do you see the difference in the word love now? The same way, you start out on a trip, and you have American money, and the next thing you have English or French or Belgian, German, but always, no matter what you're doing, 2 times 2 are always 4. 100 units make the dollar or its equivalent. Always, always, always you have your mathematical certainty, and in that mathematical certainty you have God's love, something you can rely on, depend upon. So it is as we fly in these skies and understand the fact that nothing can happen up there as long as the law is being abided by, as long as the law is being followed, the law of mechanics, the law of engineering, the law of airplane dynamics, or whatever they call it. As long as the law is being followed, you have God's love. Is that clear? You have now a sense of God's love that does not go out of its way to do anything for you. Oh, no. It fills all space equally everywhere. And because it does, that is your evidence of God's love. God's love makes it possible for you to come into absolute reliance upon it as long as you are in harmony, in accord with God's law. You have God's love. Now, you can take any of the synonyms for God that you know and say, no, God is not that. God is not life. And what will you mean by that? Will you be denying God as life? No, no. You will be denying that God is life as you understand life. In other words, you will understand that God is not the life of a mortal, because the life of a mortal comes to an end. And if God were the life of a mortal, then the life of God would become death. So now let us agree, God is not life. At least God is not that kind of life that you and I have heretofore believed God to be. Then how are we to find out the meaning of God as life? Because here comes a miracle. If you are living and God isn't your life, you're doomed to extinction. If you have any life apart from God, you are doomed to extinction. Now then, inasmuch as our concept of life has been one of a life that ages, changes, and finally dies, how can we say God is that life? We know better. God isn't that life, or we would never be called upon to sit up with patients who are dying. God is not that life, or we would never be called on to stand by with people experiencing the extremes of old age. Don't you see that? that never could be if God were what we have called life. Then, let us start off with, God is not life. Then let us turn within and say, but God is. Yes, God is. Immortality is. Eternality is. And then let us see what God defines to us as life, and then we will learn about the life which is eternal, the life which is immortal. It will be revealed to us, within us, by the Word of God. And when that sense of life comes to you, you can live forever. Or like Paul, you can decide when you wish to leave this earthly tabernacle. You can say, I'm ready to leave the flesh to abide in my permanent spiritual identity, or I'm ready to change my concept of body for something. It will be an act, though, of yours, and I'm not speaking of suicide. It will be an activity of your consciousness, the transformation from the physical sense of body to the spiritual. You won't destroy your body, but you will rise above the physical sense of body into the awareness of your true identity and of your permanent, eternal, and immortal body. How will you do this? By not labeling God as life, but by merely realizing God is. And then, with a question mark in your mind, let God define itself to you as life, as we have done before with love, as we have done with power. So you can go from one synonym to another, and you really can learn all that God is. You really can come to know God. But you must give up not only your concepts of God, you must give up mine or Mrs. Eddy's or Jesus Christ, and come into the awareness of your own. Why? Because Mrs. Eddy, I knew what her sense of God was, and I know what mine is. Jesus knew what his was, and Elijah knew what his was, and John knew what his was. But you only have words to which you attach different meanings than I do. In other words, when I thought God was love, I denied it. I said, I can't believe that God is love. But you see what my thought of love was. Everything we know on the human plane. And I could see clearly that God wasn't that. And in the same way, when we were told that God is life, I couldn't long accept that either. Because I looked around and all I could see was dying life, aging life, decaying life. How can I believe that God is that? And so in this form of meditation, God revealed itself to me as individual life, but an immortal life and an eternal life, and not any life of which we know through the human mind or books. And so while the words are the same, power, life, love, my meaning of them now is entirely different than anything you can read in the dictionary. As you come into this, you come back again to the Master. Because now you understand that since God is life and God is law and God is love, that you're not going to swing God out of its orbit to do you a favor, or your children or your grandchildren or your parents. Now you know that there's no use of that kind of prayer. The question comes up, how do I avail myself? How do I come under this law which is love? Again, we are accepting the mission and the message of the Master as our guide. And until a better one comes along, I'm sure it will do. And what does he say about our conduct? What does he tell us about law and love? He sums it all up in 2 commandments. One is to acknowledge God as the only power. Have no other gods before me. Now we've said that God is the power of creation, that God is the power of love, God is the power of life, so that we must acknowledge no life, listen to this, we must acknowledge no life but the life of God. We must not acknowledge a separate life apart from God in spite of appearances. We now must acknowledge God as the only life and stop this nonsense of my life and your life and his life and her life and young life and old life. We must come to the acknowledgement of God as the only life. In the same way, we will have to learn how to stop this business of human love. Now remember, I don't mean to wipe out friendship or marriage or parents or children. We must wipe out the human sense of love by the understanding that only God is love. Only God is love. Therefore, all love must emanate from God. Wherein has been our mistake? Wherein is our tragedy on earth? That we expect love from one another. Justice, mercy, kindness, cooperation. And sometimes we get it for a short period, and then comes the inevitable. But once we have stopped looking to each other for love, cooperation, gratitude, and accepted God as the only love, in that moment are we freed from the human loves and hates, and even when occasionally they appear in our way, they're not too disturbing. We just brush them aside as somebody else's lack of demonstration, not any ability to harm us. We're going to come to that very soon. Now, yes, the Hebrew says, lean not unto thine own understanding, acknowledge him in all thy ways. So that first commandment that the Master gave us, which is also the first commandment of the Hebraic 10, the Mosaic 10, is God is the only power. Therefore, seek nothing of anyone else. God is the only life. God is the only love. God is the only substance. God is the only law. God is the only activity. And as you train yourself to that idea of seeking the allness in and through God, you find your freedom in and through God. You do not find your freedom from anything or anybody. You find your freedom in God, and it is a miracle. When you have devoted weeks, months, sometimes years to the study and practice of that first commandment, you come to his second commandment. Not Moses' second commandment, the Master's second commandment. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Now we are rising to a higher concept of prayer. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, of course, none of us are doing that. We're all guilty of violating that, and because we are guilty of violating that, we are all under the penalty of the law. We are all experiencing discords and inharmonies only because we are violating the two laws, which are laws of love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. This has nothing to do with a human form of love. This has to do with that spiritual sense of love which we found to be law. Aha! If we once acknowledge law and love together, now we will acknowledge that anything true, let us say of God, is universally true of God's being. Whether God's being appears on earth as yours or mine, whether God's being appears on earth as his or hers or its, whether God's being appears as what we call friend or foe, saint or sinner. We are not loving our neighbor as ourself unless we are acknowledging God as the selfhood of our neighbor. The first thing we learn to do in metaphysics and in spiritual wisdom is to declare that God is my selfhood. God is my life. God is my being. God is the substance of my body. And probably that is where our greatest mistake comes in. Never should we personalize God. God is selfhood. God is being. God is life. God is love. Let's leave that word my out and make it completely universal. Then we are loving the neighbor as ourselves. There's no use of saying, oh, I love the man that harmed me. That's not spiritual love at all. Matter of fact, it may be a little bit of self-hypocrisy. It might be a little kidding of ourselves, too. It might be a little bit of trying to attain a state of consciousness to which we haven't grown. Don't let us say that I love this man that hurt me. I love this woman that robbed me. I love this nation that put us in bondage. Let's not do that.